is just the beginning.
Welcome to the fourth event in our New Shapers America's Road Ahead series, leading up to the November election. I'm Margaret Tal of Axios' White House and Politics editor, and I'm coming to you from my home in Washington, D.C. Thanks to Bank of America for making these conversations possible, and welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Axios.com. We hope you'll follow along using the hashtag AxiosEvents and @Axios on Twitter. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by Steph Kite and Mike Allen, and we'll unpack the news of the day, voter turnout, and how national security will play a key role in the November election. But now, I'd like to welcome our first guest. She's the CEO and president of Voto Latino. María Theresa Kumar joins us from Newark, New Jersey. Hello, María Theresa.
Hi, thanks for having me, Margaret. How are you doing?
I mean, I'm tired because the election's a week and a half away, but I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
But you know what I have to say? But we're not on the road. That's the biggest blessing of all of this, right?
We're not on the road, but I don't know about you, I kind of get energy being on the road. And also there is an end to the day on the road. There is no end to the day when Zoom and your office is also your dining room table, which is also next to the kitchen. So
I know. But I think that's absolutely right. No, and I do enjoy being on the road. I think the challenge though is that by November 3rd, you're just you don't want to see anything. So we're just
Right. Well, and I'm just grateful to be healthy, and I know you are too. So, but we are, like we said, a week and a half away. So look, there are major concerns that we talk about and hear about in terms of ballots being counted, mail-in ballots being challenged, problems at the polls on election day. Talk to us a little bit about what your group's doing right now in this final stretch, and what are you most concerned about? What threats are real? Are any of these supposed threats actually suppression efforts? How should we think about what we're hearing?
So I think for the most important piece is that we know that Americans in general are really paying attention, but African American and Latinos are paying more attention when it comes to how to access the ballot box this time. The majority of African Americans and Latinos really don't trust this mail-in process, and they have every right to do so, in part because there has been study after study that demonstrates that, sadly, signature matching is the biggest impediment to ensuring that their vote counts. What we have seen in Florida in the past and in other states is that if the signature doesn't match perfectly, disproportionately in Black and Latino communities, their vote simply gets thrown out in compared to other zip codes. And so what we're encouraging at Voto Latino, and so many folks is to go and vote in person if it's possible. So we're seeing a surge in Texas. We're seeing a surge in Florida, in Pennsylvania, and Arizona. That is not by accident, Margaret. That is because it's a concerted effort by the civil rights organizations to ensure that people are confident in their vote. We are also encouraging them, obviously, to vote by mail, but they are not wrong when they instinctually feel that their vote may not be counted equally. So coming into the election, what I would predict is that we're going to see not just a surge of voting across the board by all Americans, but it's the patience that we're going to need post November 3rd to ensure that every single ballot is counted properly. And places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, for example, they won't count their ballots until November 3rd. So you can imagine those nail biter of an election where these two key battleground states won't even know possibly for a week or two.
You're encouraging voters to put on protective masks and
masks. So my whole spiel, Margaret, is wear a mask, bring a snack, bring water, and bring your favorite playlist, because in some places it is going to take you longer. But this should really be an alert for every single American. The fact that we are the country that exports democracy worldwide. We are the leaders in participation of democracy as a way to enfranchise our citizens, yet we have become almost immune to the idea that we have to wait sometimes 12 hours. Talk about a poll tax on disproportionately, the working class American. And one of the things that we should figure out after this election is how do we fix that? Because it actually doesn't make any sense.
In the meantime, though, if you vote early, not on election day, if you vote a couple of days before election day, you're much less likely to find anything resembling a 12-hour line, I think, right?
Exactly right. Well, you are seeing some cases of that again in places that have removed polling places in general. But no, for the most part, you won't. And you also have a choice of more varied polling centers when you're voting early. Whereas on November 3rd, if you wait on November 3rd, you're going to have to go to your precinct. And that is going to be, you have to be a very patient person to want to engage in that.
So vote early. We don't have very much, and I have a lot of questions. So let me try to get some of these in. In what states are Latino voters most likely to have the biggest impact, and why is the youth vote so important this year?
So Voto Latino, for the first time, we have been the leading voter registration outfit. But to give you an idea, in 2008, we registered 200,000. As of this morning, we have registered over 567,000 new voters in 6 key battleground states. And these states have become battleground for the most part. Arizona, Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, is because we have seen, Florida's in there, but the 5 states that I mentioned before have seen an aging in of young Latinos coming of age. Since 2016, 4 million more young Latino voters are eligible to vote. Every 30 seconds, a young Latino becomes eligible to vote. So that is why you see such a shifting in our electoral map of what is now considered a toss-up. I was just having a conversation with Julian Castro, who's in Texas. I was like, well, what are you seeing? He's like, Texas is very much in play. And you would have never thought of this in 2016. But we have registered roughly about 250,000 new Texans. Beto O'Rourke lost by 215,000, to give you an idea. And we will mobilize 1.5 million folks. We have invested close to $33 million in just 6 key battleground states because we recognize that all of this is about closing the voter registration gap and providing people with key information to mobilize and engage.
Yeah, I mean, if young Latino voters turned out at the polls as much as they could, as much as eligible registrations allowed, there would be an overwhelming impact in the election, no doubt. But there's some evidence that Latino voters, although there's a clear majority in favor of voting for Democrats and for Joe Biden, there's some evidence that some Latino voters actually like Trump more now than they did 4 years ago. And we saw some lagging enthusiasm for Biden over the summer among some Latino voters. I'm wondering how you explain the two trends, and do you think Biden has done enough since the summertime to improve assurances or excitement among Latino voters?
So let's tackle the first question. What the Trump campaign has done effectively since 2016 is that he hasn't stopped talking to Latino voters, particularly in Florida. Sadly, the way he has peppered and spoken to the Latino community in Florida is a lot of disinformation, and that is factual and tested. And the challenge is that they're getting messages that are very much blown out of socialism, communism, and the reason why you wouldn't want to elect a Democrat who is a man like Joe Biden, who's very much more of the center fold, right? So combating a lot of that disinformation in Florida in particular has been challenging. You will always have a sector, though, of Latinos, and it's usually around 20-25% of Latino voters who are very conservative, and choice is something that's very important to them. And there are also a lot of veterans within the Latino community. So that's where we see that. However, when you shift into places like Texas and Arizona, and even Georgia and North Carolina, where you have seen local leadership that is, Trump with a small t, where they have done a lot of racial profiling, a lot of immigration laws that are just create hostility among neighborhoods in the Latino community, you don't see that penetration of misinformation. And people are voting for very different reasons. They're voting absolutely for healthcare. They're also voting for John. But this is the very first time in my 15 years of doing this work where racial inequities that exist in Black and Latino households are the top 3 issue. And that speaks everything to what I shared before, is that not only are Trump policies at the national level impacting Latino communities disproportionately, but you have the Greg Abbotts in Texas giving a different level of anxiety at the local level. And so that is where we really see a lot of this mobilization. Our biggest challenge in the Latino community, though, Margaret, is that there's 15 million of us who are eligible to vote who are simply not registered. That is the biggest challenge in the Latino community, is actually closing that voter registration gap. And that's because of the 15 million, close to 10 million of us are younger than 33 years old. And so with Biden, one of his challenges is that for a long time, he couldn't get on the ground. He couldn't knock on doors. And he was very dependent on Zoom conversations. Well, Zoom conversations really basically people who participate them are already on your team. You need amplification. So what you're going to see now over the weekend, you're going to see Julian Castro hit Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and then head back to Texas. He needs more of that communication in order to basically folks better understand what he's about, because they don't know what he's about quite yet. And my hope is that they're going to be able to use this time wisely, to use their surrogates wisely that way.
Okay, well, we have a lot to watch in the closing week of the election. Maria, Theresa, Kumar, I really want to thank you for joining Axios today.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for the conversation.
And thanks to Bank of America for making this program possible. After a video from our sponsor, stay tuned for a segment with California Congresswoman Karen Bass and political reporter Steph Kite.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Thank you again to our sponsor, Bank of America. I'm Steph Kite. I'm a politics reporter for Axios. Our next guest is representative of California's 37th Congressional District, Congresswoman Karen Bass, joining us from Los Angeles, California. Congresswoman, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
This has already been an election year like none other, with far more Americans voting early and voting by mail than ever before. California has already broken state records for mail-in voting. How do you see this impacting voter turnout in Los Angeles, particularly among people of color?
Oh, I think the turnout has been historic, and I believe that it's going to continue. We're very fortunate here in California and in Los Angeles especially. We're not concerned about some of the voter suppression tactics that have happened around the country. There have been a couple of incidences, but I wouldn't call it voter suppression. Some has just been straight out vandalism. So I think that we are in a very good position. I also think we'll have a lot of same-day voting as well.
Awesome. Congressman, you chair the Congressional Black Caucus. Can you walk us through some of the priorities the CBC has for a Biden administration?
Sure, absolutely. And interestingly, we're in the process of preparing that in a more formal way right now. But I will tell you that our number one, number two, and number three priority is COVID. It absolutely has to be, because the impact on the African-American population has been absolutely devastating. And the economic impact has as well. And then the educational impact. I just think about our children who already suffer from an achievement gap. And what on earth is that gap going to look like when they will have been out of school for almost an entire calendar year with very uneven levels of access to online education or consistency. So it all starts with COVID. Obviously, policing is a major issue as well. If we don't pass that bill in the Senate, of course we did in the House, if we don't pass it before the end of the year, then of course it's going to be front and center on our agenda next year.
Absolutely. Your name was floated earlier this year as a potential Biden running mate, and your name continues to come up for potential new roles in a new administration. If the Biden-Harris ticket wins in November, are you more interested in serving in Biden's cabinet or in the U.S. Senate?
Well, I have seen my name floated for all sorts of things. And to be quite honest with you, I really only have one focus right now, and that's the next 13 days. And I'm be very excited to think about that after then. But I have to tell you that in the House, I am extremely happy chairing the subcommittee on Africa, chairing the subcommittee on crime, where I deal with the issues that have been close to my heart for the last several decades.
Has the Biden administration approached you at all about any potential cabinet positions?
The only thing I'm talking to the Biden administration about is November 3rd.
Well, speaking of November 3rd, we are a week and a half away from Election Day. And I'm sure it's similar to you, but we've been hearing from a lot of Americans that they're very anxious about how this election will play out. And they're very distrusting of our electoral processes in many ways. What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I think that is so sad. I mean, the main reason why people are distrustful is because that's what they hear out of the president's mouth. The idea that a president of the United States would sow that type of division and dissension is just a tragedy. And I can't wait until we're past this time in our history. So what I can tell them is that the most important thing for people to do this time, you can't view the election as November 3rd. That's actually when the election ends. We have to view the election right now if you're fortunate to be in one of those states where you can vote early or you can mail in your vote. But here's the thing, all of us need to have a plan to vote. And so what I tell everybody is there's a website called iwillvote.com where you can put in your personal information and find out how, when, where to vote in your particular location. So in order to deal with all of the negativity, have a plan. But here's the other thing is that I'm really worried about November 4th, frankly. Because the president has been so divisive, I'm worried about all of those militias and Proud Boys and Boogaloo Boys and all of those white supremacist groups that support the president. He doesn't use a dog whistle. He has a bullhorn, and he's telling them to all come out. And I'm really worried that the president of the United States is going to agitate violence during and after the election. He's even calling for people to go watch the polls. And I've talked to my colleagues around the country, and they are watching the polls for one reason, and that's to intimidate and dissuade people from voting.
And given the president's remarks on these things, and given the concerns about unrest and violence after November 3rd, what role do Democrats like yourself play? How should Democrats be preparing to respond after Election Day?
Well, we need to be, one, extremely vigilant. We need to know what's going on in our districts. Some of my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus have described situations where there are white constituents either in or outside of their districts that are making it very clear they're going to be armed, that are making it very clear that they're going to be prepared. This is the kind of thing we see in other countries, never in the United States like this. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a tragedy, and it's really because things are rotten at the top.
Yeah. So you are also a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs committees. Do these committees plan to continue current investigations into Donald Trump, even if Joe Biden wins in November?
Well, there might be some of it that has to continue. I mean, one of the things, and this is going to be so sad, although I will be extremely happy in January to witness President Biden and Vice President Harris being sworn in. That will be a glorious, historic day. On the other hand, I will have tremendous empathy because they're going to have to go in and look in every single federal agency because the level of corruption, scandal, and controversy, they're going to have to go in and essentially clean up. And I think it's going to take them their first term to clean up the damage, the wreckage that has been done by this administration.
Yeah. As chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and as we look forward to a Biden administration that is expected to be one of the most diverse administrations if he wins in November, how do you see representation in government growing, and how do you think that will impact America's future?
Well, I think that it will be so critical, considering the administration we have now is one of the least diverse administrations we have ever seen. And then the idea that President Biden will come in and actually create an administration that looks like America, I think it's going to send a wonderful signal. I mean, part of the distress that is going on is because we have a president that has created so much anxiety amongst people about the fact that America is getting browner and browner. And in the next couple of decades, America is going to be a majority minority country, very much like California. That's what California is like right now. And I think the diversity in my state I love, and I look forward to the country being as diverse. And we need a president like President Biden, who I believe will help Americans understand that this doesn't mean someone's going to take something from them. They're not going to lose by diversity. They're actually going to gain. And we will be much better internationally when our country, in terms of leadership, does reflect the population. That's going to send a wonderful signal to the world. And by the way, I didn't mention that, but President Biden and Vice President Harris, they're going to have to go clean up our image around the world as well now, because people are laughing at us and the entire world is watching us to find out what happens. And we cannot disappoint the world.
Thank you so much. So sorry, we have to wrap up. We're out of time. I really appreciate your time and your response to that question. So thank you for joining us, Congresswoman Karen Bass. And thanks again to Bank of America, our sponsor. After another video, stay tuned for our final segment with co-founder Mike Allen and Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster.
Thank you to the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. Our next guest is Army General H.R. McMaster, most recently President Trump's national security advisor. Before that, General McMaster led soldiers and organizations for 34 years, including in Iraq and Afghanistan. On top of being a West Point graduate, he has a PhD in military history from Chapel Hill. General McMaster, welcome to Axios.
Mike, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, General, you're out with Battlegrounds, and this is not your typical Washington Post Service book. This is actually a scholarly book, 70 pages of notes, bibliography, recommended reading, index. You took it very seriously. What was it like to switch hats in such a big way?
Well, Mike, maybe it was a bit predictable for an Army officer. I made a mission statement for myself as I transitioned to only my second career in my life. Third, if you count my time working at a famous restaurant named McDonald's before I went to West Point at age 17. But what I wanted to do is help deepen Americans' understanding of the most crucial challenges we face, so we can work together to build a better future for generations to come. And this book is foundational to that effort in my second career here at the Hoover Institution and at Stanford University.
And General McMaster, you talk in Battlegrounds about being on the other end of what you call Russia's fire hose of falsehood. You were actually trolled along with your staff. What did you learn from that about what they're up to?
Well, I think it's important to understand that Russia is engaged in a sustained campaign of political subversion against us. And they do employ this approach of disrupting the effectiveness of our government. That was part of the attack on me under this so-called hashtag fire McMaster campaign, and the attack on members of our National Security Council staff to just gum up the functioning of our government, particularly in the area of foreign policy and national security. But also the broad effort is to disrupt us and then to use disinformation to shake our confidence in who we are as a people, to polarize our society, pit us against each other, and particularly to shake our confidence in our democratic principles and institutions and processes. And what I write about in the book is Putin also then just denies even the most brazen efforts. So it's very important for us to counter this pernicious effort to bring us down, right? Russia knows it can't compete with us. Putin knows he can't compete with us on our own terms. And so Russia is operating under the theory that he can maybe be the last man standing because he'll be successful in his view at shaking confidence within our democratic societies in Europe and in the United States in particular.
You want to talk brazen. So this week we saw the director of national security and of the FBI saying that they had caught Russia and Iran already meddling in the U.S. election. How worried are you about their actual success in disrupting this election of a lifetime?
I'm not worried about it at all, Mike. And the reason is I think we've really improved. This is largely an untold story, and of course, I was responsible for that, in part in 2017 as National Security Advisor and into 2018. And what we did is we did what you would expect.
General, what's the biggest thing you personally did to shake that up?
Well, I think the most important thing that we did is focus our intelligence collection efforts on this pernicious campaign. And then we took the gloves off of our cyber forces in a recognition that a good cyber defense with this cyber-enabled information warfare against us requires a good offense. And then I think a close second to that is just the effort to protect our cyber infrastructure broadly and our election infrastructure in particular. Mike, as you know, we have a very decentralized system, but our federal government is working very closely with the states to make sure that we can have confidence in the sanctity of our election process.
Now, General, I know you've stayed in close touch with what's going on. You're very acutely still attuned to threats to America. What's the biggest thing that Russia's changed in what they're up to in the 2020 cycle from back when you really delved into it after 2016?
Well, they're continuously adapting from a tactical point of view. Initially it was quite obvious what this Internet Research Agency was doing. You could really quickly identify the false personas. You could identify, the source of the bots and trolls. For example, they were coming to work on Moscow business hours. And so you could see that that's when the traffic would spike. But what they're doing is doubling down, I think, Mike, on this effort to divide us. In 2016, about 80% of the bot and troll traffic during the election was on issues of race, to polarize us on issues of race. A distant second was on gun control and then immigration as well. So Russia doesn't create the divisions in our society, but they do their best to widen those divisions in our society and to pit us against each other, reduce really our confidence in who we are, our common identity as Americans. And so that's why I think education about this problem is so important. If Americans identify it, right, that we'll be less susceptible to this sustained campaign of disinformation.
General, in the book, you say that all presidents, not just President Trump, get Putin wrong.
Right. Well, this is our tendency that I write about, Mike, of strategic narcissism, right? To define the world only in relation to us. And to think that the future course of events depends on what we're going to do. So, hey, if we could just get a better relationship with Putin, he's gonna change. He'll be like the Grinch, at Christmas. His heart will grow 2 sizes bigger. He'll stop his disruptive campaign against us. And of course, we had President George W. Bush went to visit Putin and said, hey, he looked into his soul. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton brought the reset button to Lavrov, and President Obama leaned over to Medvedev, remember, who was keeping the seat warm for Putin, saying, hey, I'll have more flexibility after the election. We traded off some missile defenses in Poland in the hopes that, hey, maybe they'll see that we really are wanting to welcome them back into the Western community. And then, of course, President Trump finds it difficult to criticize Putin for some reason. I think under the belief, he keeps saying, wouldn't it be great if we have a great relationship with Putin? So much of what I write about in Battlegrounds is it's not going to get better with Putin. And the reason it's not is the ideology and emotion that drives him. He is driven by a sense of honor lost associated with the breakup of the Soviet Union and the loss of the Cold War. And then also this drive to restore Russia to national greatness. As I mentioned, he can't do that on his own terms because he doesn't have the resources to do it. So he's determined to drag us all down like the KGB operator he is. He's quite adept at it. He's one of the best liars in the world, deceivers in the world. And so one of the lessons of Battlegrounds, I think, is, hey, let's just stop being chumps about this, right? Let's recognize Putin for who he is and compete more effectively, mainly by, I think, imposing additional costs on the Kremlin beyond those that they factor into their decision-making when they take these aggressive actions. Whether it's the annexation of Crimea, the invasion of Ukraine, the poisoning of attempted poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter, or more recently Navalny. I think Putin is continued to be emboldened because we and Europe haven't together imposed costs on him. Think about the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, for example, in Germany. I think that could be powerful if there are real economic costs for this sustained campaign of aggression against us.
General McMaster, you mentioned that the president's been reluctant to criticize Putin. It's funny, you and other former administration officials are reluctant to criticize him. Why do you think that the criticism of the president is so muted by the people who've been in that building and have really seen what happened?
Mike, I have not hesitated to criticize President Trump at all. I mean, I think you could probably find with a quick Google search, 30 times when I've said, hey, the president is wrong to give Putin the space to aid in his effort to deny what is even completely obvious. This is what my friend and British National Security Advisor Mark Sedwell used to call Putin's implausible deniability. So I think I think it's very important to criticize failures of policy and actions by the president, by others, in giving Putin the space. And what I write about in Battlegrounds, I criticize really both political parties, because I think what we've seen, Mike, is a tendency for leaders within both parties to compromise our principles as Americans for partisan political advantage, right? That's one of the ways Putin plays us, right? And so we have to stop doing that. And I think President Trump has not helped our cause by raising doubts about what is super obvious. But what I describe in the book is President Trump's tendency to conflate three related questions, but distinct questions, right? Did they meddle in the election? Heck, yes, they did. Did they care who won? I don't think they did, Mike. I think what they want to do in 2016 is what they want to do in 2020, which is no matter who wins, raise doubts among us about the legitimacy of the result, and to have dirt on whoever comes in so they can weaponize it against them. I mean, in 2016, it's really important to recognize that Russia, they were ready to launch a campaign saying, hey, Hillary Clinton won the election because the election was rigged. And then I think they were as surprised as most Americans, and maybe even Donald Trump was, that he won the election in 2016. And they shifted that campaign to, hey, he would have won the popular vote, right, if it wasn't rigged. So they want us to think our elections are rigged. And so the statements the president makes about raising doubts about the election process his administration has actually done quite a bit to secure, I think, are counterproductive and play right into the Kremlin's hands, right? We have to stop being our own worst enemies, I think, Mike, is the first thing we could do.
In general, you've been inside the West Wing. You've seen it up close in a way that very few people have. You've spent your life studying and practicing leadership. Would you say President Trump is a good leader?
Well, I think he's the elected president of the United States, Mike. And what I tried to do as National Security Advisor in serving the fifth Commander in Chief I served since I entered West Point at the age of 17 is to help the elected president succeed. So I respected the decision that the American people made through our electoral college and our constitutional system, and so that's I think it's for the American people to decide who should be the next president. I think my role, as a retired military officer, is to maybe help Americans make that decision. And what I try to do in the book is, describe more fully these challenges we're facing, challenges that aren't going away while we're at each other's throats politically. And I hope that what readers might be able to do is use that description as evaluation criteria, for both candidates on foreign policy. Sadly, Mike, nobody's talking about foreign policy. Nobody's talking about these challenges because we are so enmeshed in this partisanship and the personalization of politics these days. The other aspect of this, Mike, is, we ought to celebrate the fact, hey, we're not a monarchy, right? So everything is about, President Trump, Vice President Biden. Hey, we can demand better from all of our leaders, I think, and our leaders in Congress as well.
And General, we're getting the hook here. This series is called The Road Ahead. If Vice President Biden were to win the election, would you feel safe? Would America's secrets be safe with Vice President Biden?
Yes, I think we should have confidence in whomever the American people elect. And then we should all try to help that president succeed. I think that's what we're missing these days, Mike, is I think we have to break this tendency of an administration coming in, especially in the area of foreign policy and national security, and defining their policies mainly as in opposition to the predecessor. In battlegrounds, I read about challenges that it shouldn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Hey, Mike, when Al Qaeda attacked us on September 11, 2001, they didn't target Republicans or Democrats. They attacked Americans, right? So we have to, I think, come back together as a country. What I'm hoping is that we can come together, at least initially, around these issues of foreign policy and national security.
And General, the last question, you knew Vice President Biden when he was on the Hill, when he was a chairman and senator. You interacted with him more since then. Who around Vice President Biden in a potential Biden cabinet, a Biden White House, would you feel safe and secure about having in a leadership role?
Well, there are a number of people. The person I probably know the best is Michelle Flournoy, who's been talked about as a potential Secretary of Defense. She's actually extremely good. She took a lot of positions when she was in the Office of Secretary of Defense for policy that ran counter to the Obama administration's approach, for example, to jihadist terrorism broadly, but especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our premature withdrawal from both of those places gave space to ISIS on the one hand and to the Taliban on the other. I think, sadly, President Trump has in many ways replicated the deficiencies of those Obama policies. So I'm hoping that if Michelle Flournoy does is nominated and does become Secretary of Defense, she'll be a strong voice for sustained engagement, which is really an insurance policy, Mike, against another 9/11 type attack against us.
And what's something specific about Joe Biden that would make you feel safe and secure with him as president?
Well, I think that he'll bring in a number of qualities and experience into the job if he's sworn in on January 20th. As I mentioned, I don't know him well enough, but I do think what I would like to see if he comes in is a fundamentally different approach to foreign policy. I think that successive administrations now have seen the Middle East, for example, mainly as a mess to be avoided. And not that we should have large numbers of troops there or take on the problems in the Middle East ourselves. Whenever we assume that, hey, things couldn't get worse in the Middle East, that they actually do. And I think I'd like to see a fundamentally different approach to policy there and policy toward Iran. I do think that the Iran nuclear deal was clearly, in retrospect, a mistake because it failed to consider the ideology that drives the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to place that deal in context of Iran's 40-year-long proxy war against the great Satan, us, the little Satan, Israel, and the Arab monarchies in the West broadly. So I hope that if it is a Biden administration, that this Biden administration will take an approach to foreign policy that is in many ways fundamentally different from the Obama administration's foreign policies on China as well. So I think it'd just be a mistake. Hey, don't try to turn the clock back to 2016. Again, this is my point, is no administration should define their policy mainly as in opposition to the predecessor, right? Take the good and amplify it, take the bad and correct it.
Gentlemen, McMaster, we say goodbye. You've got social media savvy, so I will tell our audience they can follow you on Twitter at LTG HR McMaster. General McMaster, you've said that in the past you didn't vote, but
I encourage everybody to vote. I mean, the reason I didn't vote after I entered West Point at the age of 17 is to follow the example of General George Marshall, right? The organizer of victory in World War II, the great Secretary of State, who came up with the Marshall Plan and our initial response to Soviet aggression in the Cold War. So I really had great respect for him, and he kept that bold line between the military and partisan politics by just taking it to the extreme of never voting. So that's what I did across my career, and just voted for the first time. But I do think it's really important, Mike, for political leaders not to try to drag the military into partisan politics, right? We have to recognize that our founders were very concerned about that, right? George Washington's grandparents fled the violence of the English Civil War. And so this is I think, an important element of the strength of our democracy, and we have to be careful to preserve that bold line. And plus, hey, we want the best of Americans to join our military. We don't care what your race is, what your religion is, your sexual orientation, and certainly we don't care what your political party is. And nobody's checking registration cards when bullets are coming in your direction. So I think it's very important for us to preserve that apolitical nature of our military.
So I get your Marshall Plan. Why did you vote for the first time, General?
Well, now I'm retired, right? I'm out of the Army, but I do think still as a retired officer, I should do my part to preserve that bold line. For example, I choose not to add my name to any of these kind of dueling lists of admiral and general endorsements, for example. I respect my former colleagues' decisions to do that, right, or to write op-eds, but I do think it comes with a danger associated with it of dragging the military more toward partisan politics.
And General, I have to ask you: did you vote for your old boss, President Trump?
I think one of the great things about our democracy is the secret ballot, Mike. So I've determined not to share how I vote.
General McMaster, thank you for Battlegrounds. Thank you for all that you've done for this country over your life. And thank you for the honor of this conversation.
Hey, thank you, Mike. The honor's mine. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, General McMaster. Thanks to the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. Thank all of you for joining us. And we hope you'll join us for the next Axios News Shapers, The Road Ahead, right after the election on November 6th. Have a great election, go vote, and I'll see you on Axios.com.